Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque wrote, "We are like trees. The more the wind shakes a tree, the deeper it puts its roots into the ground." Our roots must be going very deep these days with all these storm winds blowing. I have to admit, it's been a pretty challenging couple of weeks for me as bishop in this time, and I really thank all of you who've reached out to offer support to me. It really means something to me. But my heart also goes out to all of you, all our lay leaders, all our people working in the church, all those who are helping in our church. We're all kind of caught in this conflict, this storm. And again, it is so important to remember St. Mary's words, "Let our roots go deep in the ground now." Where do we find our strength, our guidance? It's in that rootedness in God. This is His church. It's not my church. It's not just your church. God is this church. And so He is in charge of how things are going to unfold, not us. We have our part to play. But again, it's God's church here that has gone for many thousands of years. And we place it again in His hands. I guess one of the things that we're going to try to have is on Monday night, there'll be a Zoom call for lay leaders and people working in our churches. You can get the link from your local priest or from Nicole at the office. And again, just a chance to check in, a chance to hear more of the story than we get at the news, and just a chance to pray with and for each other. So that's one effort we're making. We go to the Scripture. The Holy Bible, again, is a place where we go to when we're shaken. We go to when we need some direction. And in that second reading, St. Paul says, we make it our aim to please God. That's our role again and again. Not to run off to all kinds of other directions, but what is God's will for us? How do we please God today? And that's not always easy to discern. That doesn't always come just like that. But what is God trying to teach us in this time? How do we respond to that? That's the case in your families when the storms are blowing there. It's the case in our church. It's the case in our country. What is God trying to teach us? How is He trying to move each of us? And we try to be open to that. And so, Lord, give us that openness and guidance to work at doing your will, pleasing you. Both the first reading and the gospel talk about plants and gardening. As I've mentioned before, we have 2 little garden plots in the back of our house we live in. And so Father Jim looks after one and I look after another. And in my competitiveness, I'm often seeing which garden is better. I am sure that Father Jim sometimes transplants some of his weeds into my garden. But when we try gardening and we look at it, we realize that we can put the seed in, we can fertilize, we can do some weeding, we can do those things. But ultimately, the real big work is up to God. We can't make it grow. We can't protect it always from the frost or hailstorms or whatever, those slugs or all those other things. Because always we're in God's hands. He's in charge of the big things. We work at our little parts we can do. When I'm praying in the morning so often, I just know I'm supposed to reach out to a particular person. That God asks me, make that call or somehow reach out to them. That just that sense we do our little part, but this big thing is always in God's hands. He is working. There will be a harvest. Something good is coming. To have that faith and that trust. Several years ago, some of the wording of the Mass was changed a little bit. And I have to admit, I was uncomfortable because change isn't always easy, but some of those changes have been kind of helpful for me. And one of them is just before the side of peace that we share with each other as we can in COVID time, that the words are changed to say, graciously grant his peace and unity in accordance with your will. I find that interesting that we say, don't just God's nice peace, but according to God's will. And we know in history, sometimes God's will has meant changes and challenges and storms. And we've seen that in dramatic ways throughout history. And so again, we are praying about God's peace to be in our church, our own hearts and homes, and in our country, according to God's will, not ours. Again, that act of surrendering. None of this is easy, but we are God's children. This is God's church, and He will make us more and more according to His way. As St. Margaret reminds us, may our roots go deeper these days into the strength and power of our God.